Hello friends, welcome to my next video tutorial on Java for beginners. In this video, I am going to talk about the static variables in Java. So, why do we need static variables and why it is different from instance variables? A static variable is a variable which belongs to the class, not to the object. But instance variable belongs to object, not to the class. Static variables are created when the program starts and destroyed when the program stops. But instance variables are created when an object is created with the use of the keyword new and destroyed when the object is destroyed. Okay. Memory is allocated for static variables only once in a program at a time of loading of class. But in case of instance variable, memory is allocated multiple times whenever a new object is created. Means whenever a new object is created, new memory is allotted for that object. A single copy of a static variable to be shared by all the instances of the classes. But in case of instance variable, one copy of instance variable is available to every object of the class. Static variables can be accessed with respect to class name. Means class name dot variable name. But instance variable can be accessed directly by calling the variable name if it is inside the class. However, in static methods, instance variables can be accessed with respect to object reference dot variable name. So, I hope now you are having the basic idea of static variables and why it is different from instance variables. Now let's try to understand why we need static variables with the help of simple problem. So my requirement is that I want to assign a unique ID to every person so that I can keep a track of number of persons who are entering in the bank. Each successive person who is entering in the bank should have unique ID number like 1, 2, 3 or so on. So here I am considering this case as a simple example. Okay. Now let's take a look at one of the possible solution. So I am having a class person which has an integer ID variable here, and we are going to create objects for this class. So for that I will go to my main method in my first class here, and here I will create a new object person1 is new person. Now we have our person reference variable person1 that is pointing to an actual object, and then I will assign a value person1.id is 1. Okay. After that I will create another object person2, and here also I am assigning the value to the variable id. Okay, so I will say person2 dot id is 2. Okay, now if we run the program, the output is 1 and 2. But is this the correct way? I think no, because here if we notice that we are explicitly giving values. person1.id is 1 and person2id is 2. So this is not a correct way, right? What our requirement want is the value should be automatically given when the new object is created. For that, how can we do that? I have another solution which looks something like this. Class person, and inside this integer id is 0, and this time there is a constructor, And inside the constructor, I am just writing id plus plus, which means I am increasing the value of id by 1 whenever the constructor is getting called. So now let's take a look at the main method. What is happening here? I say person1 is the new person. I am creating the object. So at this point, if you remember, my constructor is going to get called. id initial value was 0, then id will become 1 after constructor get called. Okay, now I will create another object. Person2 is new person. And here again the constructor will be called. So id initial value was 0, then it becomes 1 after constructor get called. Okay, now if we run the program, the output will be 1 1. Okay, now let's try to understand what is happening. First person1 reference variable points to an actual object which at the time of creation id is 0. So as soon as we have created the object, the constructor get called and that makes it 1 because we have set id plus plus over here, right? And same way we have person2, which is another reference variable pointing to the object. The id initial value was 0, but the constructor get called and id plus plus make it 1. So friends, is this our requirement something like this? I think no. If you remember, our requirement said that count should increase by 1. The id every time should be increased by 1 for a new object is created. In other words, what we want is first person id is 1, next time you create the object, second person id should be 2, then if you create an object again, third person id should be 3 or so on. So to resolve this issue, what we have to do? The id variable should not be separate for every object. Means we should have a common id variable for all the objects. And we just need to increase the value of id variable by 1 if any new object is created. So how do we do that? For that, we are going to use a static variables. Okay. So now this time integer id is 0 and I am going to make this is a static variable. I use this word static in front of id variable here. Now I have my constructor the same way as I had earlier and I say id plus plus. Okay, it's just the same thing except this word static here. Again, I will go to the main method and I will say person1 is the new person and then I will print the id value, and after that again we have one more person2 is new person, and then again I will print the id value. Okay, if we compile this program, then the output is 1 2. So this looks fine. Okay, now let's try to understand what happened this time. First, you have the person reference variable person1 that points to the person object, right? Then the constructor get called and then id becomes 1. Now if you guys notice that this time the variable id does not belongs to the object anymore. It kept separately. So when you have another person2, the reference variable that call the constructor again, and this time id become 2 from 1 because there is a single variable id that is maintained by all the objects, no matter how many objects we have created. or in other words, the variable ID does not belongs to any specific object. Or you can also put it this way, that any object does not have its own copy of integer ID variable. It is a common variable that every object is trying to access, or I can say ID variable belongs to the class person, not to the object. Okay. So if you guys notice the syntax, I have mentioned class name dot variable name. Now this is completely different, because before that we were giving object name dot variable name, but since the ID variable is not contained inside the object anymore, it is contained inside the class, and hence we are giving class name dot variable name to access the static variables. So important point for you guys to remember, static variables belongs to the class instead of object. There are just a single copy of the static variable that is kept for all the objects, and every method of a class can access static variables including the constructor. It is just like any other variable that you saw, except that it is maintained uniquely. Okay, so this is all about static variables, and I will discuss about static blocks in my next video. So please like, share and subscribe this video. Thank you.